Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions, the channel where we look to answer exactly those. I'm Rebecca Felgate, and today we are talking about the hotly debated subject as to whether ghosts are real or whether they're something our minds have made up in the search for answers about the afterlife. So, are ghosts real? In this video we are going to be talking about what happens when we die, the feeling of being watched, and a few ghost sightings, asking ourselves whether there is any hard evidence to be noted. So, what happens when we die? Science and the rule of thermodynamics teaches us that matter cannot be created or destroyed, it can only change forms. Energy, matter and mass remain constant. This means even though we die, we are never physically disappearing, merely changing into something else. After death, our matter is absorbed by our surroundings. For example, if left to decompose in a field, our body would be absorbed by animals and plant life around us. They in turn would take energy from our absorption. Okay, so that's our body, but what about our soul? Some agree with the rules of thermodynamics, but believe that our energy is our spirit, which is somehow able to leave our body and live forever in the universe as a constant. In other words, the body may rot and all its nutrients may be absorbed by the earth, but the spirit lives on. This is very difficult to prove or disprove, but does this mean that ghosts are real? Some say the spirit travels to a better or indeed worse place. Some say it's absorbed by the environment, and some say it haunts the earth as a ghost, an imprint of who we were when we were alive. To accept this is to accept spirits as a notion exist and are able to travel to different planes or indeed remain. I mean, it sounds far-fetched, but we cannot argue with the number of reports of bright lights coming from those who have had near-death experiences and from those talking to loved ones as they pass on. Some even report flying over fields or even seeing angels. Does this mean that there is an afterlife? If there is an afterlife, does it mean that some souls don't quite make it there? On top of the bright light dilemma, a scientist by the name of Duncan McDougall spent the early part of the 1900s trying to determine the weight of a soul. He measured terminally ill patients just before they passed and just after, noting a loss of 21 grams at the moment of death. Dr. McDougall attributed this loss, observed with scary accuracy, to the soul leaving the body, concluding that this must be how much a soul weighs. Over 100 years later, does this discovery still hold up? Well, not exactly. What McDougall didn't account for is that just before death, bodies heat up, giving off moisture as they sweat. Some even lose bowel control, and again, this could be a factor to the weight loss. Although, why was a weight of 21 grams recorded in almost all patients? Surely not all of them undergo the same loss. Okay, so let's get back to those bright lights. Scientific examination of brain function in the moments before death have noted a strong and sudden surge in brain activity, which could lead to hallucinations such as bright lights and floating figures. This same brain activity is present in people who have had near-death experiences and have gone on to explain them. Okay, so enough of souls as a general term for a moment. Let's consider those allegedly trapped souls, ghosts, and indeed the feeling of being watched. Even the most logical and scientific of people will have had at some point in their life an experience of being watched. Known as psychopaestesis or the psychic staring effect, the feeling of someone staring at us is largely rooted in paranoia and anxiety. Humans are hardwired to feel like someone is watching them, even when there's nobody there, especially if they are in an unfamiliar environment. Okay, so we may be able to lend an explanation to the feeling like we're not alone and the feeling like we're being watched, but what about being able to sense a certain emotion in a place or a building? First conceived by British archaeologist Thomas Charles Lethbridge in 1961, real stone tape theory is one of my favourite ideas I've come across when researching this topic. While I explain this, I want you to remember our earlier scientific point that energy cannot be destroyed. With real stone tape theory, it is speculated that ghosts and hauntings are comparable to tape recordings. The theory says that electrical and mental energy is released during traumatic events and absorbed in rocks, walls, and other items. Some say they can even be replayed under certain conditions. This replay could be considered a haunting as we know it. Scientifically, energy absorption is way more understandable than a replay of events. It is possible that the walls inside Auschwitz, for example, absorbed high emotional energy from those contained within them. Is this why, when we visit a place known to have a dramatic and bloodthirsty past, we have a certain physical reaction to being there? It's almost as if we can feel the despair and suffering of those who were there in the past. But we must ask ourselves, is this because of the residual energy from tortured souls, or is it simply because we know what took place here? Once again, is it our mind that is doing the haunting? So far, it seems that we have had at least some scientific understanding of what we would consider a paranormal experience. It is true that we never have been able to scientifically prove the existence of ghosts, but let us look at what evidence we do have in favor of their presence. Now is the time we are going to discuss ghost sightings. Countless people over the millennia have reported seeing ghosts. Indeed, 1 in 3 Americans are convinced of their existence, and over 2,000 ghost hunting groups operate across the United States.
It's right here, Ray. It's looking at me.
It is very difficult to determine what is an, air quote, legitimate report of a ghost sighting and what is a fake for attention. Again, photo evidence is not totally reliable, as it is possible for images to be tampered with, as we know they have been in the past. It is also very difficult to know what environment a picture was taken in. For example, that ghostly figure could be a smudged lens or a trick of the light. Instead, we will look at video, again, air quote, evidence of ghost, which is somewhat harder, but not impossible to fake. Let us look at the case of the abandoned Horton mine in Nevada. An explorer walks in, a chain begins swinging for no apparent reason, and the explorer experiences a feeling of pure terror and a sudden temperature drop. The feeling of dread was indeed also something documented by lab worker and lecturer Vic Tandy, who thought a laboratory he was working in Coventry, UK, was haunted after he began feeling depressed and cold, while at the same time curiously sweaty. One day when Tandy was polishing his fencing sword, he noticed the blade vibrating. This led him to discover that infrasound was present in the lab and was coming from an extractor fan. He then discovered that infrasound of around 19 Hz can have a psychological effect on humans, causing them to feel anxious and fearful. The rest the mind is happy to fill in. Tandy then went to join a paranormal activity group that led to the discovery of infrasound in many buildings considered to be haunted. We can't blame it all on infrasound, of course. What of these old creepy houses that people move into only to begin to experience paranormal activity? There are 2 other explanations here, which are incidentally 2 very common factors in old buildings: toxic mold and carbon monoxide leaks from old boilers. Both can have hallucinogenic effects on those exposed to them. Could carbon monoxide have played a role in the feeling in the abandoned mine? So what else? While this is a vast topic, the last thing we're going to discuss in this video is the ability to speak to the dead. If we can talk to them, then ghosts must be real, right? Take for example the Ouija board, also known as a spirit board or talking board. This is a method used to contact the dead. In theory, the board works by spirits leading those contacting them to spell out various messages. Indeed, there have been many instances from which people are convinced they've been able to speak to the spirits. But have they? The moving of the pointer can be explained by the ideomotor effect, a phenomena that is explained by users subconsciously manipulating the movement. Could a similar notion of subconscious impulse be at play with mediums, or indeed, could they be playing off our own subconscious suggestions and reactions? Or can they truly reach out to our long-lost loved ones? So ghosts. We have discovered a few key for and against points for the past 10 or so minutes. Can we now reach a conclusion as to whether or not they're real? For almost all of these paranormal experiences, we can find a scientific explanation. There is simply no hard evidence to prove the existence of ghosts. There is actually far more evidence to prove the existence of life on Mars. That said, millions of people will swear blind that ghosts exist, although perhaps it's easier to come to terms with the idea that they do rather than the idea that they don't. At least if they did, we would have some concept as to what happens to us after we die. The thought of a soul out there, lost or otherwise, is far easier to come to terms with than our own extinction, nothingness. Lights out. Are ghosts real? Probably not, but who is to know for sure? Perhaps ghosts aren't real, but then maybe we're just going about them all wrong. Many believe in multiverse dimensions. Are ghosts instead not souls of the dead, but beings operating in a different dimension that just so happen to collide with ours in space? A wild theory indeed, and perhaps something we could explore in another episode of Life's Biggest Questions. I've been Rebecca Felgate, and thank you once again for tuning in to Life's Biggest Questions. Do let me know your thoughts on ghosts, whether you believe in them or not, or whether you have had any unexplained sightings or experienced any paranormal activity. Also, do let us know what question you want us to answer next. We will see you in another episode of Life's Biggest Questions. Until next time.